Good morning, fellow subscribers. Thank you so much for joining. I am very happy to see you, and I want to thank you for having placed me at over 700 subscribers on the Andrew Tucker TV. So we are on the road to 1,000 subscribers, hopefully by the end of this year. If you continue on this trend, you'll get me to over 10,000 subscribers so that we can have very deep political political analysis on this channel. Now, the topic is affirmed, and today my topic is Jamaica's independence is a lie. The king still rules. Now, sometimes when I ask my question, when I craft my title, there's a lot of sarcasm in my tone, and you have to pick up that sarcasm. Unfortunately, we are dealing with what we call algorithms on YouTube. So you have to know how to title and to craft that title that the algorithms will be able to pick up on the audience that they need to send it to. Oftentimes when you just write any title, then a lot of times your videos are not shared with the audience, with your audience that you'd like to view them. So we love to say Jamaica gained independence in 1962, but let's be clear. Is Jamaica really free? On paper, the King of England is still our head of state, but here's the twist. While everyone is busy debating the king, the real power pulling Jamaica's strings is not in England. It's not in London. It's in Washington, D.C. Today, I'm going to show you why Jamaica's independence might be the biggest illusion of all, and how the United States quietly rules our destiny. And it is very sad to see Jamaicans thinking that they are a sovereign state and that we are fully free. One of the reasons for which Marcus Mosiah Garvey, our first national hero, yearned to have been a part of the political process in Jamaica was the fact that he understood that the colonial powers that be in Jamaica at the time did not want us to gain full freedom. They still wanted us to live on the plantocracy. So you have a few who were doing well, a few who went to school. If you speak to the likes of Professor Orlando Patterson, a Jamaican professor at Harvard University, he will let you know, among other people of his generation, they will let you know that very few people were allowed to educate themselves in that time because the British wanted a great majority of the population to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. That is what they wanted us to be, essentially, because they just saw us as slaves. We had practiced being slaves, or we filled that position, we occupied that position for centuries. And even now, sometimes they view us as their slaves. Now, what is very interesting is that the elites, the Jamaican elites, the Jamaican oligarchy, didn't allow Marcus Mosiah Garvey to fulfill his vision for where he wanted to take Jamaica to. So what did they do? They presented us with the phony Norman Washington Manley and the Bustamantes, who did not really have that sort of vision that Marcus Garvey had. Because remember now that they were the brown class and they represented a different interest. Marcus Mosiah Garvey represented you and I. He came from that working class background. And for that reason, he was not selfish. He wanted to lift us up and allow us to achieve our full potential. But that was not to be, because they gave him hell, the Norman Manleys and the Bustamantes, of course, at the behest of the colonial powers in England and in Jamaica, decided that they would not give him such a very lofty position in which he could have empowered the lives of Jamaican citizens. Now, we gained independence from Great Britain in 1962, but decades later, Jamaica is still a constitutional monarchy, with the king as our head of state. But here's the shocking truth. While many argue that the king is the head of states, it's the United States that truly controls Jamaica's future. And that is what we need to understand. I'm hearing from many people who are still talking about us becoming a republic. That's a show. That is a show because we understand that the British Empire died in 1955, to be specific. In 1955, they died. And they gave notice that after 1955, what happened? The Federation came into being. Was it 1956, 1957 that the West Indian Federation was formed? Because then the British understood that they could no longer carry us on their backs. Because, to carry us, even though they weren't giving us much, but it was an expense. And we were a colony, and we were adding expenses. They had to tax their own people to ensure that their colonies survived, just as the United States is doing now when it has its military bases and it is taxing its people, stressing them out, wearing them thin, because it wants to maintain its military bases around the world. But eventually, just like what happened to Great Britain, the United States is going to be so stretched that it is going to fall. That is what happened to Great Britain. Because World War I and World War II, make no bones about this fact. And you can go and read W.E. Du Bois. I forgot the book. I think the book that he wrote, but he's very clear in that book that World War I, particularly, and World War II were wars that were waged to divvy up the world among these so-called colonial powers, among the European powers. So they wanted Africa, they wanted Asia, they wanted the Caribbean region, Latin America. Well, to a less extent, the Americas, because we understand that the United States had already crafted the Monroe Doctrine and told them that they didn't want them here. So, so they were divvying up Africa and Asia, okay, for themselves. And that is why they fought. And they gave us lots of different pretexts over why they fought. But the main reason is that they wanted complete dominion over the world, over African resources, over Asian resources. Very important that we understand that. And they were competing against each other. We like to talk about the white man, but the white man, there's no white person scientifically, that doesn't exist. But that is the world we grew up in. But the fact of the matter, the Europeans don't like each other too. Yes, they will actually go up against us when they have to unite because they don't want, people who are not from their continent to win. So they will unite with their own people to ensure the downfall of another man. But they have constantly waged war against each other. Now, when we look at the 1960s, when we became independent, we know that they told us that our economy was actually moving on and we were growing rapidly. Haven't we heard that? But nobody is telling us, or very few people are telling us, that that wealth was not inclusive. That what you had were foreign investors, the Americans particularly, who had bought out the bauxite companies and all of these companies, and they weren't paying taxes for the most part. Okay? They were not paying taxes for the most part. So what would happen? You would not have the development of a country, and you would have the enrichment of a few who benefited from that system. Because as you know, when you have these policies, a few people will benefit from them. Let's be clear on that. And that is why the few who benefit always say the government is doing great. Look at the development. I'm living well. So it means, therefore, that you should also live well. And that is how we have been indoctrinated into thinking that we look at the individual and we do not look at the collective. And as a collective, as a group, as a body of Jamaicans, yes, the economy was growing exponentially, but the wealth was not equally distributed. Now, fast forward to 1970s, we had the likes of Michael Manley, who came to power, with the intention that he was going to at least share some of the wealth. He did not want to distribute the wealth equally. That was not his plan. He wasn't a communist. Michael Manley was not a communist. That was mere propaganda by the United States. Okay. What he wanted to do, however, was to ask the foreign investors, the American foreign investors, the Canadians also, if they could return some of the proceeds of their lucrative industries back to the coffers of the island so that he could, plow these funds into education, into healthcare, and into infrastructure development. Remember now that the British left us without any great infrastructure. When you go to the Spanish countries, like in Latin America, you go to Colombia, you go to Panama, and even the Dominican Republic, you see a better infrastructure there, better infrastructures. And a lecturer at the University of the West Indies, well, she's a professor, and I had this conversation when she came, when she, when in Santo Domingo, when she attended a conference. And we were talking about the whole matter of comparing Santo Domingo with Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica. And, she was saying that, and she was spot on, that the Spaniards and the Portuguese, they settled in these colonies so that they developed the infrastructure to be able to live there. In Jamaica, however, the British, for the most part, did not settle there. They were not settlers. It was an absentee plantation. So they generated their wealth from afar. So they did not build the infrastructure, the hospitals, the roads. So we have roads, and we had roads, but they were not in good condition. Or education, school, as I'm saying, access to a very selected few, because it was not their intention to have an educated populace. Okay, I'm even reading now about, and you can also do your own research on that, an article I was reading yesterday about Operation Legacy, in which this professor, it sounds like she's Jamaican too, but she resides in Canada, and she's a professor and of history. And she was talking about the documents that the British actually destroyed, some of which and hid, some of which have been found in 2011, and the courts actually demanded that the British make them available to scholars and to museums, in which Great Britain was trying to hide a lot of the process in which she was involved in to have us free, because Great Britain understand, according to the article, Great Britain understood that they were not going to set us free. It was just a mere gimmickry facade of freedom. It was an illusion of democracy and freedom, because they know that the economic order was still in place. And that is what Michael Manley came to the 1970s talking about, a new economic order. He was trying now to see as much, if he could, or how he could divvy up, share the wealth among the people that we could live. Because guess what? If we do not live together on that land, and there is tension, which there are lots of tensions, that's why we're having all the crime and violence, and we're so angry as a people, because we're looking and we're seeing one of our brothers or sisters living in a mansion, and I can't. Why is she allowed? And Jamaicans are the way how we think. If you have it, it means that I can have it too. Okay? Because we think we are it, right? We think that we are kings and queens, right? So if neighbor A can live in a mansion, neighbor B should be able to live in a mansion. That is how we are as a people, right? So Michael Manley understood that we had not yet forged a nation. And in order to have forged a nation, an independent nation, that we needed to have shared the wealth. In fact, was it Norman Washington Manley, when he was leaving the office of premiership, who had said that his generation had gotten us political independence, but it was up to the other generation, his son's generation and beyond, that should have gotten Jamaica economic independence. And that economic independence is the real independence. Without economic independence, we cannot have political independence. I repeat that. Without economic independence, we cannot have political independence, because somebody is going to control us. And that is a whole matter of the conversation that is happening around the world, including in the United States, about the state the current position of our politicians, are they really the ones leading, or are the financial donors the ones who have enabled them into office? Are they the real movers and shakers of these countries? And that is so. The financial, because he who pays, the piper, he is the one who calls the tune, right? So that is the whole matter. So the fact of the matter is that we have not gained political independence. We have neither gained political independence nor have we gained economic independence. We know now that the CIA destabilized the efforts of Michael Manley to have forged for us, a quasi-economic independent society. So he was booted from office in 1980. Came along Edward Seago, who now instituted the neoliberal, neocolonial brand of development, in which foreigners came back to the country after Michael Manley had sent them away, and they did what they were doing from the 1960s and before, by just, working the people, building enough infrastructure that they can function, and then repatriating their wealth and their profits to other countries and leaving the country without any development. And that is what is happening in Jamaica. Has been happening there from the 1960s, put on a pause during the 1970s, and then went back into full swing in 1980 and beyond to present. Now, interestingly, when Michael Manley came back to power in 1989, and you can go online and you can see that he came back as a free marketeer, as someone who had now embraced the very model of economic development that he had rejected in the 1970s, because he wanted power. And he came back riding on the wings of Washington. My understanding, and I heard Dr. Well, she's not doctor. I think she is, Beverly Anson Manley. Did she get her doctorate? But, I think that she got her doctorate, but, I've never heard her called doctor, whatever. But Beverly Anderson Manley, let me call her that. That she said, or I might have read in one of her writings, that Manley was actually escorted to dinner after he won the election in 1989 by the then President Bush. That's the father, to dine with him, because he was proud of the transformed Michael Manley, who was now a free marketeer, one who believed in neoliberalism. And you have videos of Michael Manley going to Washington, D.C. and speaking to the investors and tell them to come. Now, I am not against foreign investors. What I'm against is this neoliberal form of development in which they go there and they abuse, they exploit labor, and then they send their profits outside of the country. And that is a model of development that we have in Jamaica. Hence, we saw when the hotel workers were complaining last year about their measly salaries and the fact that they could not protest against the injustices happening on these hotel campuses. And note that we had a series of protests afterwards, and now silence, complete silence, because I'm sure they have been warned that if they do it again, I'm sure that drastic actions will be taken against them. Okay. The first prince came in after Manley, that's P.J. Patterson, continued on the same trajectory. And then we had Golding, who was in office for a short time, practically continued on the same sojourn, right? Because what Golding was doing with his debt swap thing, I thought it was great. But now looking back, I understand that it was the same thing. It was the same sort of neoliberal undertaking. And the whole matter of relying on foreign investors, okay, to build Jamaica. Now, do you remember when Air Jamaica was about to collapse because it was, insolvent and was in high debt? And there was a particular captain, a pilot, distinguished Jamaican pilot, who seemed to have gathered some shareholders, and he wanted to buy Air Jamaica, okay? And Golding told him no. And was it weeks afterwards? We heard that he committed suicide. right? We heard that that captain, that pilot, somebody who was a sane person, because give Air Jamaica its due, it had never had an accident. Okay, so all of a sudden, when the uh, business effort proposed by the said pilot did not go through, all of a sudden we heard that he died. Okay, well, you are the one who will have to decipher what you think about that. Okay, we've had the IMF in our lives, and the IMF has run roughshod over us from the 1960s. I understand they've been there from the 1960s. And we have seen the painful relationship between the Manley government, the Siaga's government. In fact, Siaga was, even though he was a neoliberal proponent, but even him understood, even Mr. Siaga understood that the IMF was a deadly, vicious institution and pushed back and pushed back. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons why he had to go, because he had become too feisty and he would challenge them about some of the austerity that they were imposing upon the island. Okay, now we bid the IMF attack in 1995, as that's what they told us. But because of the financial meltdown, we came back into their throes in 2009, thereabout, and we've been at it again. All right, we've been at it again, and our economy has been set back. We have been hearing about debt reduction, but we know that the quality of life is not what it should be. In fact, there was somebody who responded to my last video, and she was saying that she went to Jamaica and she cried every day she was there. She just went back to the UK. She cried every day that she was there. Why? Things were so expensive. People were not coping. Okay. And she wondered how her family in Jamaica was surviving. She wondered. And yet still the government unconscionably tell us every day that the macroeconomics are great and that inflation is at a record low and our people cannot afford basic food items. Okay? Can't afford basic food items. And yet we fool ourselves. And we're now going back to another election cycle. We're going through that, and people are going to go to the voting booths to vote. Right? Thinking that somehow Mark Golding or Andrew Holness is going to change the path on which we walk. But if we're not having these open dialogue and conversations about, are we really free, and who is controlling our economy? And I've been asking the question also, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at the United States and we see that in the United States, at least, even though they're not fully free there too, but they declare, or they have their politicians declare, their financial donors. We don't know who the financial donors of our political leaders are. Because at least you can see, even beneath their manifestos and the glamour and the glitter of these promises, people who are intelligent can say, oh, X person contributed to Kamala, to Biden, to Trump. And you can have a general outlook of where his administration is going. Because you know who these people are, the Elon Musk and these people. In Jamaica, we don't know who are the campaign donors and what they are affiliated with and what is their political and economic agenda. We just don't know. So we are just betting on our politicians. We don't really know who they are. We say we know because through their campaign promises and their manifestos, but we just don't know because manifestos are empty. And oftentimes they don't do what they tell you that they're going to do. Or they put a lot of Band-Aid on very deep wounds. And that is not going to fix the problem if we're constantly putting Band-Aid on that deep sore. It's not going to help us. Okay? So everything we do, Michael Manley was booted out of office by the CIA. Bruce Golding in 2008, because of the the fact that he also challenged the IMF. He didn't want to send us to Washington because, according to him, the United States had had broken our laws in terms of wiretapping. They wiretapped Christopher Cook's conversation, and that is how they were able to compile evidence against him. And at the time, doesn't seem like it's the same story now. The wiretapping laws were not in agreement with what or how the United States had compiled its evidence against Christopher Cook. Okay? Now, here we are in the throes of another IMF. The IMF was saying that they should allow us to crash after Golding had demitted office, right? And then the PNP came in that 2013, was able to ink out an agreement with them. We're back at square one. They're telling us our debt is down, but at what cost? Okay? Healthcare is collapsing. Many of our hospitals don't have basic equipment, even toilet paper, soap. And the other day, somebody wrote a letter in the Gleaner saying that while he would like to applaud the current government for some of the macroeconomic stability in terms of building these big projects, right? These mega, super big projects. Like he said, they're breaking ground to build some tower. I think it's some, the health tower, some hospital at the University Hospital of the West Indies. But he's saying basic day-to-day things that should be in the hospital are ignored and patients die. Basic things that they should have that could ensure the waiting time because they don't have enough beds. The medications that they need for certain surgery are just not there. And he's saying the little things are those things that count, but you have to ensure that you meet these needs before you talk about mega projects. Because people are going to die. People have to eat. And if they can't buy basic items at the supermarket, then what development are we talking about? What freedom are we talking about? Okay. Now, the IMF has set us security benchmarks. And if you listen to Anthony Anderson, the current Jamaican ambassador to the United States, he would let you know that for the first time in the history of the IMF, they imposed upon Jamaica security benchmarks. So when you're seeing the state of emergency and all that they're doing, these are things that have been imposed upon them by the International Monetary Fund. And you'd have thought that the International Monetary Fund is just about giving you some money and going and putting it down your debt. Okay? Now you talk about climate change. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, let us be clear now. I think that we are going to be in the claws of the IMF forever. Why? Because they're talking about security benchmarks now. And another thing is the climate justice agenda. These are two policy stats that we know will last forever. So I don't think the IMF is going to leave us at any time soon. All right? Because they have now expanded their mission and what they are about. Okay? So we have now we've got to begin to assess what is happening and say that nothing that we do, we can't do it without the blessings of the United States. Petro-Caribbean, all right? That was beneficial to us. We can't do it because who said? The US says we can't do it. 2016 or 2017, Andrew Holness wanted to expand the telecommunications center or the telecommunications industry in Jamaica. The US said no. He wanted also to build a new parliament with funds from the Chinese. The US said no, and he couldn't. So who do you think control? Who are you thinking is controlling Jamaica? It can't be Britain, right? The Jamaicans go to the king or to the queen at the time and say, the US is harassing what I'm doing. You are the head of state. Speak to them and tell them that I'm going to do it. Because it is not the way the show is run. the show is run by the US, and the US gets whatever it wants. If it has to kill you, so be the case. Right? So we need to reassess our understanding of what freedom is. Because as far as I am concerned, we're not free. Unfortunately, my fellow Jamaicans, we are not free. And I was hearing the other day when I talked about the visa situation and many emotions got out of place. And yeah, we're a sovereign state and we don't have to go to Great Britain. Be careful of what you say. Be careful of what you say, right? And all the opportunities that you might get, even though they might be politically motivated, try to take advantage of them. Because these people are not going to liberate you anytime soon. We are the ones who have to be the agents of liberty for our own lives. So don't depend on Mark Golding. Don't depend on Dr. Andrew Michael Holness as we head to the ballot boxes for another election. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe, like the videos, so the videos can be shared with as many people on the platform. And please let me know from your perspective, do you think that Jamaica is a sovereign country? Please let me know. All the best. Ciao.